Chapter 10. The Cosmic Theatre of Life. The bustling city streets were slick with rain, and a chorus of chatter mingled with the pattern of droplets hitting pavement, creating a claustrophobic atmosphere. The oppressive presence of the hegemon enforcers could be felt lining the streets, their imposing figures casting a shadow over the crowds of consumers and users. At every corner, tiny pop-up vendor booths emerged from the walls, manned by hegemon tech employees who joyfully and meticulously directed and processed the lines of people waiting to receive Nick's implants, resembling a fast food drive-thru more than an invasive medical procedure for a mind-altering technology. In one swift motion, the employee would take out a small black injection gun and press it against the back of the person's neck, shooting nicks into the base of the skull, just below the occipital lobe, acting as an interface for the visual cortex. The procedure was painless, almost too easy, and, as Azoth promised, completely free for all demographics. Amidst the chaos and hurried movement, Alina and Krishna walked side by side, their peculiar presence going unnoticed by the masses. They passed by the lines of people eagerly waiting for their turn at Nick's installations, as well as shops and stores filled with consumers. Electric cars glided past them silently, only the splashes from puddles giving away their presence. The air was thick with the scents of bug meat, noodle soup stalls, and spices from hole-in-the-wall restaurants that lined the street. Fluorescent digital billboards and neon shop signs towered over and illuminated the whole scape. Krishna and Alina both came to a halt. "Take a good look around and tell me what you observe," said Krishna. Alina took in her surroundings and began listing off the various objects she saw: people, shops, cars, signs of all kinds. "Yes, those are just the physical objects, but do you see the deeper significance behind each one?" challenged Krishna. As he reached into his satchel and smudged a dot of sanguine onto his thumb, he exclaimed, "Boop!" and pressed it onto Alina's forehead between her eyes. Suddenly, her vision shifted as if a veil had been lifted from her eyes. What she saw was a hyper-reality, an ultra-culture beyond the mundane and tangible. The bustling cityscape was there, with its fluorescent billboards, neon signs, and bustling crowds. But overlaid on top of it all was a chaotic amalgamation of augmented reality, a dizzying bombardment of sensory stimuli. Holographic advertisements floated in 3D space, tailored to Alina's individual preferences. A commercial for Nyx played above the implantation huts. Her usual selection was highlighted as in stock at Mr. and Mrs. Abrams Minimart. Other data streams advertised porn sites, drugstores, psychic readings that already had her name and address saying, "Mystic Myrtle is waiting to reveal your future." Animated icons pointed to other various all-purpose stores that would pique Alina's interest based on her digital profile. The roads were adorned with color-coded arrows, guiding traffic and pedestrians. Even the sides of buses served as virtual canvases for commercials and promotions. In this world of constant stimulation and manipulation, Alina was just another consumer, bombarded by targeted advertising at every turn. This was no longer just a cityscape, it was an all-consuming, simulated digital jungle built on simulacrums. Nausea began to build from the swirl of vertigo in Alina's head, her neural pathways straining to process the deluge of sterile data. Krishna injected himself into the illusion with his unfeeling words. History repackaged, weaponized for societal assimilation through artificial memories, the never-ending Cold War waged by civilian soldiers. He led her through the maze of virtual sediment, a labyrinth of digital decay. They came to the oracle altar, where people were offering their daily prayers. Alina followed, struggling mentally and physically to keep up. Krishna, not slowing down, continued his tour, motioning to oracle. Veiled spirits feed on the filth of our repressed unconscious urges, mutating them into deceiving electronic gods. Thought-form entities, winged messages delivering perverse secrets across vast virtual planes. Spirituality is being snuffed out by the onslaught of divine knowledge imprisoned in deific icons. Corporate vultures are picking the flesh off our withered, bloodless bones while the flame of spirit, of meaning itself, is extinguished. Alina took her focus off Oracle and back on Krishna. He had no digital profile, was untraceable in this technological world, and stood like a carved piece of ancient earth. His stare penetrated through Alina's augmented eyes and straight into her soul. He continued as they now stood at the base of Oracle, amidst the oblivious worshippers. "This is the world of Ahriman that Azoth has so tirelessly built. You are trapped within a labyrinth of algorithms, encryptions, and data, stripped of the ability to decrypt their purpose, rendering life devoid of meaning. For meaning is derived through understanding the relation of a specific thing to everything around it. Now you are adrift in a sea of fragmented information with no connection to reality. The muted mouth of cyber communications, the great phantasms, ideological echo chambers, eternal feedback loops engaging their willing participants. Krishna came to a stop at the end of a wide, winding alleyway, and his dark eyes fixated on the grandiose, old-fashioned theater that stood at its end. Its weathered walls were adorned with intricate carvings and patterns of celestial constellations and swirling galaxies. It sat completely out of place in contrast to the bland and decaying modern buildings surrounding it. A ticket booth made of worn wood and rusted metal stood proudly in front of the theater, flanked by two towering wooden doors that seemed to hold centuries' worth of stories within their aging frames. Krishna took in the bustling city around him before turning to Alina with a sad expression. "Do you see now their insidious plan?" he asked her. "To erode our imagination by isolating us from reality. They want to disconnect us from the natural cycle of time, daylight, darkness, seasons, until our minds become barren wastelands. Technology offers a one-sided conversation, leaving no room for spiritual growth or inner development. Day and night being told and sold to only feed the passions of the flesh." Alina listened intently, but her focus was drawn to the charm and mystery of the old-fashioned theater. She felt herself being drawn to it. "So what is that down there?" she asked curiously. "That, my dear, is the cosmic theater of life, and we're almost late for our showing," Krishna replied with urgency. Come, hurry along." He started walking, but then stopped abruptly, remembering something important. He turned to Alina and smiled a small smile, smudging another dot of sanguine on her forehead. Boop! Instantly, the augmented nightmare cut out with the glitch, and her vision returned to the decaying brick and metal city that she was familiar with once more. Standing behind the ticket counter was a young, willowy blonde woman, poised like a dancer ready to pirouette. She donned a vintage usher's uniform in blood red and shimmering gold, complete with snowy gloves, a crimson waistcoat and jacket bedecked in golden buttons, a tidy bellhop hat with a strap, a glimmering bow tie, and a crisp white undershirt. Her cheeks blushed like roses as she beamed at her patrons. "Good day, kind sir. Might I interest you in 2 tickets to the grand show?" Krishna responded with equal cheer, while Alina couldn't help but marvel at the whimsical spectacle before her. With graceful ease, the usher plucked 2 golden tickets from the sacred stack, leaving behind a trail of glistening gold dust. "Do enjoy the show," she chimed, presenting them with a flourish towards the magnificent double doors. The doors creaked open into the empty movie theater. Krishna and Alina were greeted by the heavy crimson velvet curtains draping elegantly in front of the silver screen. The ceiling and walls were adorned with a breathtaking display of the cosmos, stars, comets, and planets all swirling together in perfect harmony. The plush ruby seats were perfectly aligned, leaning to the coveted center where Krishna eagerly took his place, ready for the cosmic spectacle to unfold. The theater exuded a dreamy aura. Alina could smell aged wood, dust, and old popcorn. Her eyes danced among the celestial tapestry of the walls, soaking in every stroke of vibrant color and intricate pattern. The domed ceiling breathed with life, pulsating with the energy of 1,000 stars. She was lost in this trippy wonderland, a psychedelic reality that was far more real than any salamander or Nick simulation. After a beat, Alina managed to form a question. "I don't get it. Where's the show?" "Life itself is the grand show," Krishna replied cryptically. "A transcendental superlattice, a cosmic network processed through individualized systems. You are not Alina, you are an ancient quantizing biotechnology collapsing reality into form." Alina began to lose patience with the yogi's cryptic words and was about to tell Krishna to give her a straight answer. But, before she could, the crimson curtains began to part, revealing the main event. Krishna clapped excitedly, then pulled out a bucket of buttery popcorn, stuffing a handful into his mouth, most of it ending up on his nest-like beard. "Hush now, pay attention," he mumbled through spittly bits of flying popcorn. It was a man, tall and lean, with a commanding presence that seemed to seep through the fourth wall and lock onto Alina's own eyes. His piercing gaze held a hint of mischief and mystery, drawing her in like a moth to a flame. He stood with perfect posture, his body adorned in a dashing new Edwardian suit. The black fabric was accented with crisp white pinstripes, adding an air of sophistication. A plush velvet collar added a touch of luxury to the ensemble, along with an embroidered waistcoat and polished shoes. In one hand he held an umbrella cane, twirling it lightly as if it was an extension of his arm. Perched upon his head was a sleek black bowler hat, completing the effortlessly suave look. He stood amidst a sea of neatly tilled fields, embraced by the undulating hills of England's tranquil countryside. In the field behind him was a small flock of sheep moseying about, chewing the cud, giving off faint bleats and baas now and again. The sun cast its golden rays upon him, creating an ethereal glow around his form. His presence radiated an air of grace and allure, luring Alina into his whimsical world with just a mere twinkle in his eye. Soft, playful classical music floated across the hills, adding to the overall peculiarity of the scene. Alina couldn't help but feel entranced by the strange yet charismatic figure before her. "Hello there," he boomed with a beaming smile, interrupting her thoughts. His tone was cheery and enthusiastic, inviting her further into this enigmatic realm. She glanced over at Krishna for guidance, but he simply smiled, revealing popcorn kernels stuck in the cracks of his wide-gapped teeth, and motioning for her to continue watching. With a joyful tone, he declared, "I am Alistair McAllister, a member of the Invisible Order of Immortal Nobodies, and today marks the beginning of your orientation." A sneaky smirk spread on his face as he continued, "Now, I'm sure you believe that you were born with a soul, but I am afraid to inform you that you would be gravely mistaken. You were indeed not born with a soul." His words lingered in the air for a moment. Alina couldn't help but think this was all some kind of joke. Of course humans had souls. But before she could ponder any further, Alistair's enthusiastic voice broke through her thoughts once again. "You are not born with a soul, but you are born with the potential of growing a soul body." He hinged forward slightly as if getting a better look through the silver screen at Alina's concerned expression. "Oh, don't worry, my dear," he exclaimed. "That is why Mr. Krishna and I are here." With that, he turned to camera right and began walking, his head slightly tilted down in deep thought. Every now and then he glanced at the camera as he spoke. "You see, it all started a very long time ago." As he said this, the world around him transformed from the quaint English countryside to a lush garden filled with every type of tree, plant, and flower. Alistair now stood in what appeared to be a glowing, perfectly curated garden. Instead of light coming from an external source in the sky, each tree, plant, and blade of grass emitted a soft, blue-white light from within. It was as if there was one light and life force connecting every piece of nature, emanating from within outward. "And here we are," Alistair cheerfully stated while turning back to Alina. "The Garden of Eden where it all began." Alina's gaze was transfixed on the beautiful scenery. Joke or not, her attention was now fully absorbed. "You see, once upon a time, humanity existed in what you could refer to as a symbiotic conscious state, very similar to a baby in the womb." He continued walking and came alongside the bank of a river that gracefully flowed with water that sparkled as if made of diamonds. "Our original structure of consciousness was completely integral, a pre-rational and pre-personal state of being. Just as a baby in the womb does not have spatial awareness or a sense of self separate from its mother, so too humanity originally did not perceive itself as a distinct individual separate from all creation around it. The inner and outer experience of life was one unified whole. At this stage of development, humanity experienced creation in what is akin to a subconscious state." He walked alongside the shimmering river and paused to kneel down and adjust a flower with a soft purple glow, delicately angling its 5 petals and long stem towards the camera. "Now, the substratum of life is an infinite lattice of oceanic information. As Krishna just said before this movie started, it is what we call a transcendental superlattice, a continuum of pure consciousness based on ideals, flowing in and through all things. Understanding that all forms are simply constellations of information synthesized together through impersonal consciousness, held together as concepts are held in mind, we are able to get a glimpse of the omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence that generates all seeming form." He took a quick but appreciative sniff of the flower before standing back up. Reaching into his left vest pocket, he pulled out a golden pocket watch to check the time. "Ah, here we are, right on schedule." He turned back to Alina. "Let's give her just a moment." Entering the frame was a naked woman. Her skin was almost translucent. The blue-white light radiated from within her as within everything else. She seemed unaware of Alistair's presence as she walked past him. Alistair gestured for Alina to be quiet as he followed the woman through the lush, flowery forest. Alina, eyes glued to the silver screen, blindly reached over and grabbed a handful of Krishna's popcorn, shoving its kernels into her mouth. The translucent woman eventually reached the base of a towering tree, its bark emitting the same iridescent glow as everything around it. She stood there for a long while, gazing at the majestic tree and tenderly touching its trunk. With graceful movements, she reached up above her head and plucked a large piece of juicy fruit from a low-hanging branch surrounded by vibrant leaves. She brought the fruit to her nose and smelt it, felt its soft, velvety texture in her hand, then brought it to her mouth. She was about to take a big, juicy bite when Alistair suddenly held up his right hand. "Right! Pause the film there!" Alina snapped out of the ethereal moment, swallowed down her mouthful of popcorn and looked over at Krishna to see what was happening. Krishna kept eating. He glanced over at Alina, gave her a little wink, and then turned his attention back to the screen. "You probably aren't aware because true religion in your time has been outlawed and occulted. But this is the famous Eve, one half of the infamous Adam and Eve. You might be thinking this fruit looks juicy and delicious. And you'd be correct. That's precisely the point, you see. In this historic moment, Eve had just experienced a very subtle conscious shift. She suddenly started to see this juicy fruit as something that is very desirable in and of itself. This, in turn, builds a barrier within the psyche by turning the universal life principle, which is all-pervading, in on itself, seeking pleasure and satisfaction from the created, in this case the fruit of this tree, instead of seeking it from the source. The consequence of this is the formation of a privatized state of consciousness, an awareness of self as other, a separate, individualized entity. "Right, continue the film, please." Alina glanced behind her, confused as to who Alistair kept directing. Adam and Eve now stood together. Both took bites from the fruit. The juice ran down their cheeks. For a moment they were enjoying it, but suddenly they dropped the fruit and grabbed their stomachs as if in severe pain. Alistair stood slightly behind them, watching the whole thing play out. Their once ethereal essence began to transform, hardening into a dense and suffocating layer. The blue-white light that had once emanated from their bodies was now almost completely covered by an opaque barrier, like fungus spreading over a log. "This is the moment when everything changed," Alistair said grimly in a whisper. "This is the birth of the ego. A psycho-spiritual split has occurred. Now, instead of only knowing good, God, they know evil." In the movie, Adam and Eve could be seen in their new organic skin suits, fear etched on their faces. The once lush, vibrant garden around them now withered, its light fading as the same hardening layer engulfed everything in its path. Alistair looked at Alina through the fourth wall with an exaggerated expression of sympathy. "Tragic, isn't it?" he said. As Adam and Eve now traversed a barren desert, the mirage of Eden lingered in the background. Alistair followed slightly behind them. "But do not despair, my dear," he reassured her. "This is all just part of the grand plan, and this is actually the moment that reveals the true purpose of life in your three-dimensional universe, which is to willingly and consciously develop your soul body, and in so doing, become an individualization of the universal whole." She reached for another handful of buttery popcorn, but Krishna side-eyed her and suddenly shifted the bowl away from her reach. Alistair took off his bowler hat and wiped the sweat off his brow with a luxurious silver handkerchief before placing it back in his pocket. His hat was back on his head in an instant, and he continued his monologue. "Eating the fruit triggered our spatial awareness, birthing our three-dimensional universe with its opposing forces, as our three dimensions are composed of 6 directional forces. Forwards and backwards, upwards and downwards, left and right. All derived from the concepts of self and not self, good and evil, absolute and limitation." Alistair started to struggle against the unrelenting desert heat. "In this world of 6 dynamic opposites, there is a 7th point which always remains anchored, our I-amness, which is freely given to all. Through this unchanging I-amness, we all have the opportunity to collect experiences as we traverse through space-time, cataloging and integrating them into our personal databanks, or what we perceive as our private consciousness." He popped open his umbrella and raised it above his head, grateful for the shade. "Ah, much better. Now, where was I? Ah, yes. In the cyclical universe, our personal selves experience a linear progression of thoughts, feelings, and desires. The long game and key to all of this is to humble and dissolve the," he held up quotation marks, "self, and willfully merge it back into the omni-consciousness that is the I am that I am, Jehovah God Almighty." Alistair now stood still, taking a break from the desert heat. His eyes fixed on Alina through the screen. There was a moment of silence, and then, in a flash, time sped up all around him. He held onto his bowler hat as he was transported through thousands of years of human evolution, his surroundings morphing and changing. All the while he remained still. A blur of Earth's evolution continued until it reached Alina's present day. Shaking off the disorientation, he fought against a strong gust of wind as he spoke with urgency over its roar. Put simply, everything is moving from an unconscious state towards a state of ultimate supraconsciousness, what we, the Immortal Nobodies, have come to know as Logos, or the Christ. The scene suddenly paused and Alistair relaxed once again, lowering his voice to normal volume. To achieve this, we must align our consciousness with universal principles of life, and then our soul body, or eternal sense of being the individualization of the universal whole, can begin to grow. Like how a seed grows when planted in the earth. We do the planting and watering, and God does the growing, and in turn the metaphysical and the physical merge together, bridging heaven and earth. Alina gasped as Alistair took an exaggerated step forward and stepped right through the silver screen into the theatre without missing a beat. The soundscape of the film was muted, and Alistair's voice was now close and personal. Now, the obvious question is, he continued nonchalantly, why is all that necessary, especially when it's caused so much perceived suffering? Well, to be a true individualization of God means we must have free will, for God is completely unbounded, all-consuming life, and so, to create a creature that will be the perfect synthesizer of his supreme personality, the creature has to choose this out of their own free will in order to be truly like God. He came and took a seat next to Alina's left. Krishna looked over with a smile, his bucket of popcorn finished, half of its contents stuck in his beard and splayed on his little naked belly. Alina could only sit there and stare at Alistair with her eyes wide, still in disbelief to see him in the flesh. Alistair took a very large breath in and then exhaled, relaxing and recovering from the desert heat. I'm sure this all seems very overwhelming to you, and you probably have no idea where to start. Well, fortunately for us all, this astronomical task has already been accomplished by a man from Nazareth born in Bethlehem approximately— he paused to consult his pocket watch— 2,044 years, 3 months, 28 days, 12 hours, and 22 seconds ago. But I'll leave all the details of that portion of your orientation in the capable hands of our friend Mr. Krishna here. He placed his golden pocket watch back in his vest pocket, leaned forward in his seat to peer around Alina at Krishna. By the way, good to see you again, old chap. With that, he stood up and took off his bowler hat and, with a slight bow, said, As for thee, I bid you adieu. Cheerio, and best of luck to you. He placed the hat back on his head, and with a spin of his heels and a twizzle of his cane, he about-faced and walked out the theatre.